right, looks like we are live. Hello, everyone. Happy Friday, and welcome to class. I'm Jesse of Sam's Bead Shop, and I'm going to be going through a little course on stretch bracelets. Stretch bracelets are one of my absolute favorite ways to create. For a lot of reasons. They're super versatile. You can do so much with a stretch bracelet. It's a great, easy win. So if I'm ever having creative block, stretch cords are my go-to for designing. Super easy, super quick, and if you mess up, it's super easy to fix. Hello, welcome in, Lori. Good to see you. So yeah, we're going to be going over stretch bracelets. And kind of, if you never did one before, this is going to be a great kind of step-by-step intro of how to get started. And yeah, so welcome in, everyone. Happy Friday. So I'm going to flip this around, and we're going to go to the bead cam. Let's see here. Let's see if this works. The solo, oh, perfect. It worked. So I have some examples that I made for this class. If you caught my first class on this, I kind of tried to do the opposite of what I did for that class. So I tried to use some beads that I didn't use, like these coins. And then I used a wide variety of spacers, some rounds, some large facets, just to give a mix of things that I have done before. I also have some examples of other ones that I've done, so you can kind of get a wide variety of examples of different bracelets that I've made over the past, I don't know, couple months. And these, I did this one for a design challenge in the Gem Chat, which was really fun. I think that was for October maybe of last year, but it was just a lot of fun to like kind of do a little challenge and maybe do something I normally wouldn't or haven't tried yet. So let me clear this space up a little bit here. We'll leave those off to the side. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing to be aware of, or the first choice you're going to have to make when making stretch bracelets, is choosing the right cord. We carry two sizes here at the shop. We have the 0.5 millimeter and we have the 0.8 millimeter. They range from, I've seen them as small as like 0.2 millimeter. I've seen them go all the way up to like 1.2 millimeter. These two sizes are really going to be pretty much a go-to for anything that you use, especially when starting off. You don't have to get fancy with it. You don't have to get make things complicated. You really just need two sizes. And even then, to start off, you can just use one size, depending on what you're making. If you're going to do chunkier items like these, you're going to want the 0.8. If you're going to do kind of smaller, more delicate size things, you're going to go ahead and use the 0.5. There's two reasons why choosing the right cord is so important. The first one is with chunky items like this that have more weight to them, you're going to use bigger beads. If you use the smaller cord, it's really easy to break them, whether it's just putting them on your wrist or whether it's just kind of the weight of the beads themselves on that finer cord, that smaller cord. It's just not going to be able to handle the weight. Another thing that you want to be mindful of when choosing the cord is so something like this doesn't happen. So if you look at this bracelet, it's pulled in multiple spots. So no matter what I do, it's pulled in, which means the cord is too tight. And that's very easy to do if you use the larger size cord with smaller size beads. They are going to want to shrink a little bit after you make and complete your bracelet because they do have that elastic to them. So this is something you really want to avoid. You want to avoid this because, one, it's not going to be as comfortable to wear. It's possible that when you put it on, thankfully this one's big enough when you put it on, it might actually pull against your skin, and you don't want to leave marks behind from wearing these bracelets. It will prevent a little bit of circulation over a long, if you're wearing it for more than a couple hours, which is something we absolutely don't want to do. And then also, like you can see, it's just not going to hold its shape right. So it can kind of look a little funky. And when you wear it, you can kind of get that bend will fall into it. And so it won't just lay quite nice, which is something we want to avoid. One thing I can say is that if you're making a bracelet kind of on the larger size, so I typically make mine around 7 to 7.25 inches. That's usually what fits my wrist the best. If you're going to make them a little bit larger, say in the 8-inch size, if someone has like a larger wrist, and you're going to be using kind of larger beads, you actually just want to bump up to the larger size, because the more beads you add, the more weight there's going to be. And so we want to take that into consideration. So now that you've chose the right cord size, which I'm going to make a little bit along the way here, I actually want to make the opposite of this. Since I have the beads for it, I picked out the blue large facet rondelles, or the darker blue ones, the sodalites. I picked out some copper faceted rondelle spacers. And then I'm also just going to use the faceted round labradorite beads that I used on this bracelet. So I'm kind of just going to do the opposite of this. I thought it would be kind of fun, see how it would look, and just to have something I like to kind of do that, where I'll use some beads and then I'll do the opposite of those, whether it's adding the opposite color in. So like instead of using these labradorites, if I wanted to remake it with, say, a black spinel or a faceted onyx, just to kind of do the opposite. I always have fun doing that. But since I'm going to use these kind of larger facet rondelles, I'm going to go ahead and use the 0.8 millimeter. That's going to be my choice for today. All right, let's go back to my step-by-step. Next up, we're going to do to cut the cord long enough. So my go-to is I'm going to double the length of my bracelet to make sure I have enough tail to tie the knot. I don't want to be struggling to tie the knot. I want to make sure I have enough to be able to be in full control and kind of be able to adjust the tension. I find when you don't have enough material to work with to tie the knots, either it's easy to make the knot too tight, or you don't have enough of the knot to actually like control how tight the bracelet's going to be. And we'll go over that a little bit later when we're tying the knots. So I'm going to go ahead and take my material, and I have my ruler here. So I'm going to aim for about 7 to 7.25 inches. So I'm going to measure off 14 inches of material. And then I actually just like to go a little bit further, just to be sure. The last thing I want to do is not have enough material. So I'm going to go ahead and measure out about 15 inches of stretch cord. So I have my 15 inches here. And again, the biggest thing for me is like, I don't want to get to the end of my project and realize I don't have enough material. So I do a lot of stretch cord, and then I do a lot of hemp cord knotting. And it's the same thing. Like it takes me 6 to 8 hours sometimes to make some of my knotted necklaces. And the last thing I want is to be like 6 hours in of an 8-hour project and realize I'm just a couple inches short. So, the cost of these materials is very small comparatively to the beads or anything else. So I'm totally okay with having a little bit more waste to make sure that I have enough material to work with. So I have my 15 inches for my 7-ish inch bracelet. And as long as you have enough material, we can go ahead and go to the next step here. So the next step is going to be to pre-stretch your cord. There's a lot of reasons why we want to do this. So the first main reason is I want to identify if there's any weak points in my material. So I'm just pinching here and then pulling through, making sure to get a good stretch in. And I'm going to do that along the full length of material. We want to pre-stretch the material to make sure that, one, there's no damage, there's no weak points, but we also want to kind of break in that material. Stretch cord is going to shrink back a little bit, but it's going to stay a little bit stretched, which is going to, if you ever worked with stretch cord or even like a rubber band, the first time you start pulling on it, it's not very stretchy. And we want to kind of fix that. So I got all the way to the end of my material. So I'll go ahead and measure it just so that we can get an idea. So my 15 inches of material just became 16 inches of material. So I gained about an inch pre-stretching it. And again, that's going to shrink back a little bit after we're done. But I'm going to do this like 2 or 3 times. Just, again, checking for any weak points that might break after I tie it and just from normal wear and tear. And this also is going to allow us, when we finish our piece, we're going to be at around 7 to 7.25 inches. After we tie that knot and the bracelet sits, it is going to stretch a little, or it's going to shrink a little bit back in. And this way we know after the bracelet's tied, when it's worn, it's going to end up being kind of that length that we want it to be. Let me go back to these comments here. Exactly. Just like stretching before you do any kind of physical activity, we're going to do the same thing because this is, a physical activity with the material. So I've done this probably about 3 or 4 times now, and my 15-inch piece is now close to 17 inches. So it's not going to shrink back to 15, but it's definitely going to shrink back to 16.5, 16.25, something like that. And so we have our material pre-stretched. So if we don't pre-stretch enough, or if we use a cord that's just a little bit too heavy duty, that's where we're going to run into this issue here where the cord shrank beyond the bracelet length that we wanted. And now we kind of get this funky shape. And we definitely don't want that. This is definitely, if we're going to pre-stretch it a little bit when we wear it, it's also mean we're going to have to stretch it beyond what we want. And that's going to potentially lead it to break while it's being worn. And I will tell you that when they break while they're being worn, it's like a little explosion. The beads are just going to go flying everywhere. And we absolutely want to avoid that. So we have our cord. We have it cut to length. We have it pre-stretched. So we are going to go. Exactly, Patty. So if you don't pre-stretch the cord enough and then you start working with it, you tie the knot, it's going to end up like this. I would not wear this piece because I know what could happen just from the cord not being pre-stretched and being a little too tight. So I would actually, before wearing this, I would actually just go and restring it. It's nice when you have something like these stretch bracelets, because if you do need to restring it, it's one little piece. It's a couple pennies, maybe a nickel worth of material. And then we know that it's good to go and ready to be worn. All right, so let's go back to our little overlay. So yeah, choosing the right size, cut the cord to length, pre-stretch the cord. Now we are going to go on to design tips. There's a whole multitude of different design tips that you can kind of go through when it comes to stretch cords. I personally tried to make everything as symmetrical as possible. That way, no matter where the bracelet lies, it's going to have the design you want it to. Something like this, you could even say, oh, I'm going to put that in the front today. And now I have that kind of little center focal, or hide it on the back. And now you have just that nice symmetrical piece. Another design tip that I really like to incorporate in my designs whenever possible is, again, it's symmetrical, but I have this kind of larger bead and it's hard to see, but the knot actually tucks into that bead. I think that's a great way to kind of elevate stretch bracelets to the next level, because now it doesn't look like a stretch bracelet. Now it looks just like a regular bracelet. Granted, there's no clasp, but it hides that knot really well. And hiding that knot also helps prevent, that's one of the weak points of a bracelet, is going to be right next to the knot, the cord on either side. So hiding that knot inside a bead helps protect it just a little bit more. Another kind of design tip is, so for this bracelet, it is symmetrical, but I added a little charm on the bottom there, and that would help hold this charm because it has more weight. It's going to help hold the bracelet in place. And a good example of that is something like this. So I used kyanite, and then I used these metal spacers, but I wanted to have this check glass lotus charm as the center point, as the focal of my bracelet. Now, being that check glass is going to be a lot lighter than all of the kyanite around it, if you put this bracelet on, and as you go throughout the day, and I'm going to kind of do that. So I just shook my wrist a little bit. That piece is already kind of wanting to go towards the bottom there, because it's lighter. So a lot of times I'll counterweight it with something a little bit heavier, and that way it's going to help keep that in place as I'm wearing it throughout the day. Another example of that is something like this, where I have this large shell focal and I want to help keep it in the middle. Granted, I have Larimar and crystal quartz all the way around, so that's going to help balance that out and just keep that in the center there. No matter what, though, throughout the day, these are going to twist and turn, and you're going to have to reset it. It's inevitable. But these little tips can help it maybe last a little bit longer. Let's see here. Another tip that, so for example, for something like this, and you have these repeating patterns, another tip is to just be mindful of the beads you put next to each other. So this one doesn't have it too bad. And, I have my knot tucked in, but you want to keep beads that are a little more rough away from that knot. So for example, if I had these pebble nuggets next to the knot, the pebble nuggets aren't necessarily more rough, but they do have a drill hole, and that drill hole has more of a sharp edge than these spacers are going to have on top of it. So I put the spacers next to this metal bead. That's just going to, again, help prevent that knot from not getting any extra damage than just beyond the wear and tear of what we'd already have. And I think that's about it for those. Kind of the same thing on that. And the same thing on that. Having the beads that have less sharp edges, that don't have, any gemstone with a drill hole is just going to have more of a rough edge. And keeping that away from your knot is just going to help your bracelets last a little bit longer. Okay, so those are some of my design tips. Everything else is totally up to you, and it's fun to experiment with. So like I have these large smooth ovals, and then I have these small imitation pearls. This was something that I hadn't tried before, and I wanted to give it a go, and I think it came out really well. And then the same thing with these coins. So using 2 different size coins, just like you would 2 different size rounds or spacers, it's just fun to play around with. So design-wise, you really have a lot of room to play with. Even here I have some box facets, and then I have these almost like a star cut. I think they're cornerless cubes, whatever you want to call them. Same here, I matched rondelles with rondelles, and then I even put some smooth rondelles to help just kind of add to that focal piece a little bit more. But those are definitely the big ones in my mind, is hiding the tail, being mindful of the beads you're putting next to the knot. You want to try and keep rough things away, counterweighting your bracelets so that the lighter focal stays at the top. And we will go on to our next here is tying the knot. So on the back of these, you can see the type of knot that they recommend from Bead, which is basically a kind of a double overhand knot. You could use, there's types of fisherman's knot that you can use. If I was going to do anything outside of a bracelet, I probably would think about upgrading my knot to something a little more robust, especially if there's going to be more weight on it. But for all my bracelets, I use a single overhand knot. And I do that for a variety of reasons. One is I've never, after getting comfortable with the knots, I've never had one of the knots just come undone. So I don't feel the need to have a more robust knot. I've had more issues with just the bracelet breaking somewhere in between, or just getting caught on something. So I don't really have any issues with the knots themselves. But to show that knot, we'll just go ahead and make up this bracelet really quick, because I already know what my design is going to be. It's going to mimic this, but it's just going to be using the sodalite over the amazonite. So I'm going to start off, and you could start off wherever you like in the designs. I'm going to start off with the labradorite. And, so here's another thing that I probably haven't gone over just because I haven't really run into it. But for example, with this bracelet, the pebble nuggets have a smaller drill hole. So occasionally you might not be able to use the beads you want with a certain piece, or you might have to just kind of take the risk and downsize your cord. So because of that, I had to use the 0.5s versus the 0.8, say on something a little bit larger like this. So this is a good example. I wanted to use the 0.8, but because of the drill hole on these cubes, I had to use the 0.5, even though I wanted to use the larger size. But it's always good to check each of your beads before you're going to start using them. So even on this one, for example, I would say half of the pebbles actually fit on the cord that I chose, whereas half of them didn't because the drill hole was just a little bit too small. So just like this, we're going to mimic it. So I'm going to put a spacer on. And then I'm going to put the sodalite rondelle on. I'm going to put another spacer on. And we are back to our labradorite faceted round. Yes, you could absolutely get a corded bead reamer. You can get a variety of ways to make the drill holes just a little bit larger. But sometimes you're just going to run into like an Indian cut bead where you're going to have to use a 0.3 millimeter or the 0.5 millimeter, even though you really should use the 0.8. So you can definitely get away with it. For something like those pebble nuggets, I think it's better just downsizing. You're going to run into potentially breaking a bunch of beads. You might have rougher edges than you would like. So in that situation, I would just downsize your cord size, or potentially maybe use different beads. I know sometimes you don't want to necessarily do that. For if you're making a piece for yourself, go ahead and risk it for the biscuit. But if they're pieces that I'm doing on commission or if I'm going to sell, I want to be super certain that my bracelets are going to last as long as possible. And to that is a great question. What do you find is the longevity for a stretch bracelet? That's one thing I'm always nervous about. So there's going to be a couple factors that go into how long is a stretch bracelet really going to last. The first one is going to be the quality of your materials, which I love bead-along elasticity. I think it's great. I wouldn't use an old spool that's more than a couple years old if it's just been like sitting in my bead stash. If I come across one that maybe fell into the wrong bin and I don't know how long it's been there, I'm not going to use it because just like with rubber bands or like an elastic waistband, the elasticity is going to wear, but so is the actual like quality of the material. You can run into a dry rot situation where it's going to break very easily. The second one that I find is probably the most common, what's going to dictate how long your stretch bracelet's going to last, is how well you take care of it. And I think, let me see here. So that's going to be after tying the knot. But we'll jump ahead to that. So caring for your bracelet. This is really what's going to have the biggest impact on how long your stretch bracelet's going to last. So caring for your bracelet, you should not go into the ocean. You should not take a shower. You should not let your stretch cords get wet at all, if possible. Any exposure to water or liquids in general is going to reduce the length of the stretch itself, the stretch cord. The other one is pre-stretching your bracelets before you wear them. So just like with pre-stretching the cord before we create with it, any of these bracelets that I wear, that I have, I'm going to pre-stretch. So all I'm going to do is just gently start stretching it from each side. I don't want to really pull because it's easy to snap, but I want to give a little tug on each side. I don't want to just go throwing it on my wrist. I want to kind of warm up the elasticity. And you can already see, like, from where it was, those first couple stretches, I already gained a little bit of stretch out of that. So now that it's stretched out, now I'm definitely comfortable to go ahead, because as I put it on, I'm going to stretch it out. So it sits perfectly on my wrist here in size, but you're going to add a couple inches getting it over. So pre-stretching your bracelet is also going to be a huge asset to extending the life of your stretch cord bracelets. Sun exposure is going to be another one. Just like with most gemstones, most materials, you're going to want to limit the amount of UV or light exposure or even heat exposure that they're going to be experiencing. So keeping them in a drawer that doesn't get a lot of light, keeping it out of a damp basement, keeping it out of a place where say if you live somewhere where you have kind of warm summers but very cold winters, you don't want to leave it, say, like on your porch, like on an unscreened porch or a summer room where it's going to experience all of those temperature shifts, because that's also just going to reduce the lifespan of that stretch cord. Given all of that, I have stretch cord bracelets that are over 10 years old. So they can last a long time. Absolutely. I would say on average, I expect a stretch cord bracelet to last 3 to 5 years. And a lot of times what I do, or what my process is when I'm going through my stretch bracelets, I'm pre-stretching them, I'm looking at them for damage. I would rather restring a bracelet before it breaks than wait for it to break. Because again, if it breaks while you're wearing it, if it's on your wrist, you're out and about and it breaks, it's going to explode. And if you're, in a grassy field, you're on a hike, that bead explosion, that bracelet explosion, you're going to lose a lot of your beads. They're going to be very difficult to find. And I also find that they always break at the worst possible time. So like you're crossing a street and you go and it catches on your purse and it breaks. That's going to be a very inopportune time for your bracelet to break. It's going to be very difficult to find those beads and to pick them up. So my goal is to always like examine my bracelets. I'd rather them break while I'm pre-stretching them than break out and about. But yeah, given that, I always tell people, either when I give them one or if I'm making them one, 2 to 3 years minimum, 3 to 5 years is what I would expect. Anything after that is great. But yeah, I have bracelets that are over 10 years old. I wear them a couple times a year, either for a specific event or whatever it may be. But I have them. They still hold up. But that's, they're in like a shoebox or in a drawer that doesn't get any light. They don't experience big temperature fluctuations. I don't get them wet. Yeah, avoiding yeah, exactly. That's the last thing we want. So pre-stretching also, before you wear them, pre-stretching could also help avoid that, because maybe you notice there's a little bit of damage on the cord itself. So you don't wear it. In your pre-stretching, you find that the material is starting to disintegrate and you're losing kind of its integrity, so you can restring it. Or, if it's a piece you haven't worn in a long time and you're pre-stretching it and it breaks, it's much better for it to break, in your living room than it is out and about in the world. Because speaking from experience, especially like I had someone gifted me a bag of beads. It was like 8 beads. It was just enough to make the bracelet I wanted to. And I made it. I had it for maybe like a year. And then I was out and about, just not paying attention as much as I should have. And it did break. And I was only able to find like 3 of the beads that they had gifted me. So I was unable to remake that piece. And that really sucks. So doing those things can help avoid the worst case scenario. It's just inevitable. Working with stretch, it's going to break. It's just like working with small nylon knotting cord. Like over time, it's going to break. It's not meant to last forever. Just like hemp, it's going to wear over time and it's going to break. There's just nothing you can do to avoid that. But there's things you can do to prolong that and then to avoid worst case scenarios, like breaking while you're crossing the street. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to add one more spacer to this side. No, I just want to double check that. Let's see here. I think that's good. I know it's going to be maybe a little smaller than I want, but I'm okay with that. I like having a variety of different different size beads and or different size bracelets. I find like from 6 3/4 up to 7 1/2. Most people's wrists will fall inside of that somewhere. And knowing that, like, I'm probably not going to wear this one, I'll probably end up giving it away at some point. I'm okay with it being a little bit smaller. Same with this one. Like, This was my first time working with imitation pearls. I just wanted to give a shot. I think this bracelet came out absolutely gorgeous, but it's definitely a little too small for my wrist. But I'll just give it away at some point. And I think that's half the fun of these bracelets. You can use cheaper materials, make them quick, and give them out as gifts, or maybe someone who's interested and they just want to get into beading. You could say, hey, these are super easy to make. Here's this one. You can have it. Okay, so let's go back to tying the knot. So being that this is the 0.8 millimeter, I know I already pre-stretched it. I'm going to pre-stretch it just one more time to make sure that it's going to be the size I want it to be when I tie the knot. Again, I use a single overhand knot. This knot that they suggest on the back is going to be a little more of a robust knot, but I find it's very difficult to tie it and have the bracelet with the right tension and keep it at the right size with not having too much slack. I've tried that knot before, and usually I end up with a little bit of a gap, and I don't like that. So first thing I'm going to do is I've already pre-stretched it. You can see the tails aren't exactly the same size. So I'm just going to kind of wiggle that a little bit and even those out just so I have enough room to work with. I'm going to pinch the beads and pull them because I want this a little bit tighter as I start making this knot. And as I do that, I'm going to pull it. So I still have the tension. I'm going to pull it next to where I have the tail pinched. So that's going to have, you can see I have a little bit of tension on the bracelet itself. And now I'm going to hold these beads back with my other hand. I have the start of my overhand knot, and I have 2 fingers going through so that I could pinch that tail. Before I do that, this is where I'm going to add all the tension that I want. Because I have the overhand knot is made, I can make more tension or relieve and give a little less tension depending on how much is there and how much I want. So now these line up perfectly. Again, this is going to be kind of my last chance to add tension. I could release tension after this step, but it's going to be very difficult to add more. So I'm going to pull through, and I'm still holding that original knot or that original overhand knot where it is. And now that I have the tails, I'm going to pull them and slide the knot towards the beads. So now I have my knot there. At this point, if you realize the knot isn't tight enough, you can actually undo it because it's not biting on itself yet. So at this stage, you can undo the knot if you have some pliers, some like needle nose. I would recommend using like the flat variety. Don't use the ones with the grips and ridges on it because you could damage the material. So I like where that's at. It's going to stretch a little bit as I make the knot, but that's perfect. That's where I want it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch it out a little bit. I'm going to pinch on this side of the knot. This is like a huge important step to using a single overhand knot in these bracelets. I don't want to just pull both ends to tighten the knot. I want to pinch on this side of the knot, and I'm going to pull the tails, and I'm going to slide the knot towards the bracelet. That's going to make sure the bite of this knot is on the side that I want it to. Because if I do it from both, it's going to bite evenly, and that's where you're going to run into the knot actually coming undone over time. So now that I've pulled and I have that bite where I want it to, and I'm not pulling, as you can see, like as I'm pulling, the bracelet's not getting any more tension. The bracelet's staying exactly how it was because I'm pinching the knot itself. So I'm pulling the tail against the knot. Now that that's where I want it, now I'm going to pull both sides of this tail. And I'm going to put pretty good tension on it. As you get used to working with stretch, you'll know where like the break point is of where, okay, if I pull any more, this is where it's going to break. I want to get like 70% of the way there and pull those both ends. So I bit the one side and slid the knot to make sure that's where all the tension really is. And now I'm just going to pull both to make sure that knot is really cinched down. You can see I don't have too much of a weird, it's not over tight. Like, look how kind of wonky that is because I made the knot too tight and I used the wrong size cord. This is where we want it. It kind of even wants to push back out, and we know we're good there. And this is also another important step. We don't want to cut off the tails too close to where the knot is. I want to make sure that there's maybe at least a millimeter of material left on this side of the knot. If you cut it too close, it is possible, one, that the knot itself will break, or it can come undone over time because there's not enough material and it will just wear through. So it's going to be hard to see. So that's way more than I want. So I'm going to take off a little bit more here. And having a good pair of sharp scissors is really key here. You can just take off a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. So if you can see there, it's kind of, maybe that'll help show it. So you can see the knot and okay, so the tail is about the size of the knot. That's kind of a good rule of thumb. This bead isn't going to be, or the knots, because of this bead, I don't think I'm going to be able to tuck it in, which I'm totally okay with. That's going to be inevitable. I have beads in my stash specifically like this. It's like a large hold silver bead. So this size knot can just tuck right inside of it. I will also use kind of these larger rondelles because you could put 2 or 3 of them together to hide your knot. Let's see here. Kind of like, I think I did it on this one, where the knot is next to one of these beads, but because of that large hold rondelle spacer, it tucks right in. So having those larger hold beads can really help kind of tuck those in. But when you're first starting off, maybe you don't want to worry about it as much. This being on the bottom side, I'm not too worried about it. Do you ever put glue on your knots? I like to use hypo cement because it's flexible and possible to remove if I need to restring. I typically won't add glue. I would say the only situation where I might add glue would be kind of something like this, where I'm using, these are like 10 millimeter crystal quartz rondelles and 10 millimeter Larimar. So this, these pieces can get heavy. In that situation, I would consider it. Even this one, like that knot, my tail is right next to the focal. But when you're wearing it, you honestly don't even see it, which is another beauty of stretch. Yes, don't use super glue. Anything that is oil-based with super glue, the super glue will actually eat into the material itself. So not only can it dry out the elastic and make it break, it will just melt the plastic itself. So definitely be careful of what you're using. Hypo cement is going to be a nice alternative to super glue. You can maybe use Elmer's glue for just a little added strength to it. But I find that once you get comfortable with these knots and using them in this way, once you're confident in them, I don't think there's really any need to go above and beyond. If you really, really want to, you totally can. That little bit of extra isn't going to hurt. It is going to make your knot a little bit bigger. So for something like this, where I used these little cube spacers, if I added glue, I probably wouldn't be able to tuck the knot into one of these spacers because you're going to add a little bit of a coating and make that just a little bit bigger. But you definitely can. I use Elmer's glue when I work with hemp. I think it works great. Do I need it? Probably not, but I like using it. I think it's helpful. And if you find that, you feel more confident using a little bit of hypo cement, go ahead and use it. It's not going to be a bad thing. But I just find with these types of stretch bracelets, I don't find that they're absolutely needed at all. So something like this, where it's like a 3 millimeter hole inside, then yeah, you can go ahead and add some glue and it's still going to hide and tuck into that spacer. If that doesn't matter to you, go ahead and add the glue. I think it's a personal call on that one. So that's tying the knot. We pretty much went over caring for your bracelet, keeping it out of the sun. Don't take a shower with it. Don't let it get wet. Honestly, be mindful of what you're wearing with it. If you're wearing, say, a watch and you want to put a stretch cord bracelet next to your watch, just keep in mind that it could potentially, like I even took mine off because I'm always catching it. It could catch. So I don't like to wear them with anything else that they could possibly catch on. If you have like a side purse kind of thing, if you're wearing a long sleeve jacket, like these are all things that could potentially catch your bracelet and break it. So sometimes it's like, even though I want to wear this bracelet with this outfit on this day, based on what else I'm wearing, it might just not be the best idea because it's more prone to break. If there's anybody who has last minute questions, go ahead and put those in the chat now. I think I'm going to go ahead and flip myself around here. We are back. I'm going to get rid of this overlay so you can actually see me. So if anybody has any questions, we got like a minute or two left. Go ahead and ask them now. One thing I suggest is like, just try. I mean, for a couple dollars for a full spool, I'm sure you have plenty of beads in your stash to work with. Just give it a shot. I find that it definitely has its place. It's not the end all be all, but I definitely find it has its place in creating and in jewelry making. Just like with any other piece, just with like knotting pearls or, you know, putting a lobster clasp on a choker. I don't like lobster clasps, but there's certain instances where they absolutely, like, it's a nice tool to have in your belt. Yeah, Heather, once you get comfortable with those knots, and you're like, wow, yeah, this knot isn't going anywhere, I don't think the glue is needed. If it's a very, very chunky piece, like if I was going to use like 14 mil, 16 mil gemstone beads on a bracelet, that would be the one situation where I'm like, okay, this is a very, very heavy piece, and that little bit of glue might actually go a long way. Other than that, I think it's totally not needed, but it's a personal call. You can use it every time if you want. You can use it sometimes. It's all up to you on that. You're welcome, Julie and Morphin Designs. I'm glad you guys enjoyed the class. Hang out with me. If that's it for questions, I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. Thank you for spending some of your Friday with me. If you came to my rapid fire, you got the double dose of Jesse today. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you next week. Goodbye, everyone.